Hey y'all, have you caught yourself longing for some good old Southern cuisine lately? I don't know about you, but just the thought of warm, gooey peach cobbler or crispy golden chicken fried steak has me hollering yeehaw and tapping my boots in excitement. In the South, fried chicken with buttermilk biscuits wasn't just something people ate. It was an event. It has crispy, golden skin on the outside and succulent meat in the middle, and then there are those buttery, flaky biscuits that are great for soaking up all the gravy on the plate. In this culture, it meant so much more than simply eating. It was a legacy and continued hope. It was cooked in hand-me-down skillets from grandmas that had been around before all the grandkids. The fried chicken was big in Southern households, and all Southern women had their own well-guarded secret, whether it was marinating the chicken in buttermilk, adding a pinch of spice, or double dipping in flour for that extra crunch. And those biscuits? Heaven. The biscuits of the 70s were not those flimsy pop-open tubes that we have today. They were made by beating and rolling dough with our hands and cutting biscuits with a cookie cutter that produced differently shaped biscuits, but all equally yummy. They were as soft and crumbly as they needed to be, sometimes accompanied by a pat of butter or a drizzle of honey. And fried chicken nights? They brought the whole family together, often with neighbors and friends joining too. Southerners, I believe, knew that fried chicken and biscuits were the very core of the cuisine, a dish that satisfied not just the hunger, but created rays of comfort that remained in the hearts long after the last biscuit crumb was digested. Shrimp and grits may come across to some as being chic, but this delicacy was a go-to meal for Southerners. It was a staple coastal dish, especially in the Carolinas. Puffed wheat itself was a staple, and grits were already so popular, being a cheap, heavy, and therefore satisfying breakfast food that could be served boiled with butter, milk, and likely some cheese. However, when combined with shrimp, it is cooked in garlic butter and spices. Then you'll have yourself a delicacy to behold. Shrimps and grits merged as the surf and turf dish. Coastal families were resourceful enough to whip it up with fresh shrimp acquired in the day. That divine shrimp seasoning soaked perfectly into the grits, and by adding just a little seasoning, you'd make each forkful rich and delicious. Shrimp and grits transitioned from a breakfast order to a dinner order in the 70s and were quickly adopted by the southern part of the United States. This meal is the definition of Southern innovation, transforming basic and ordinary food products into extraordinary and special. Every Southern family had their spin on it. While some included bacon, others hot pepper sauce, and some even tried out smoked meat. However, they did it. Shrimp and grits were a meal that served up the Seaside to the table and converted ordinary fare into extraordinary. Tender chicken and dumplings are pure comfort in a bowl. This meal originated in the 70s when comfort food dominated most households, particularly during cold nights or lazy Sundays in the southern parts of the United States. It was a simple dish, soft, meaty chicken cooked with a rich broth base accompanied by dense, starchy dumplings that softened and absorbed all the rich flavors of the broth. Cooking dumplings could be defined as a labor of love. This was even more so if one had rolled them out by hand. Some families made them thick and chewy, while others made the dough light and dropped it into boiling water with a spoon. In either case, they were ideal partners to the velvety, savory stock made from scratch with homemade rich chicken broth. Chicken and dumplings were utilitarian as well. It was something hearty, simple, inexpensive one-pot dish that could be easily prepared from any available meat and could feed many people, which was very useful for the large families in the South back in the day. This dish turned dinner into a cozy gathering, bringing everyone together to ladle out bowls of that hot, hearty goodness. And if you grew up with chicken and dumplings in the 70s, you know that the aroma of a bubbling pot of this dish meant one thing. You were about to sit down to a meal made with love and tradition, spoonful by spoonful. What is considered to be simply cornbread accompanied by boiled collard greens with ham hocks is actually the heritage of every Southern woman. Cornbread was consumed daily since it was cheap, simple, and versatile. Each family had its own recipe. Some preferred it crumbly, others added a touch of sweetness, and many liked a crispy edge from baking it in a hot skillet. It was perfect for soaking up the pot liquor, the flavorful broth from the collard greens. Speaking of greens, collards were no joke in the South, and ham hocks took them up a notch. The ham hock, a smoked, flavorful cut of pork, slowly simmered with the greens, transforming the dish from plain vegetables into something smoky and rich. Collards were as fresh as they could get since in the 70s, many Southern families grew these themselves, especially during the winter months when leafy green vegetables were most in abundance. Cornbread and collards were convenient and economical meals, using whatever options were available. And that pot liquor? It was considered a treat on its own, often stopped up with a piece of cornbread. Together, cornbread and collard greens made a meal that was more than just filling. It was a connection to the land, to family tradition, and to the South's enduring spirit. Chicken fried steak, with its generous coat of cream gravy, will simply remind you that Southerners can turn just about anything into a meal. This stew was once a popular dish in the South. In the 70s, was renowned for turning a cheap cut of meat into a delightful one. The secret? A breading technique borrowed from fried chicken. Wash it with seasonings, coat it in flour, and fry until it is crispy. The name chicken fried is due to the breading and frying method that is very similar to fried chicken, thus transforming simple beef cut into a crunchy, lovely brown morsel. Most decadent, though, is the cream gravy made from the remnants of the flour, milk, and oil used to fry with. The gravy is laden on the steak with extra attention paid to the crevices, resulting in a delicious, creamy bite through each slice. Chicken fried steak used to be a simple dish for a large group of people in the 70s, plus it was cheap too. It is perfectly clear why families enjoyed it. These humble products were turned into something absolutely desirable. Chicken fried steak and gravy were evidence that, with a little bit of Southern innovation, even the most ordinary of meats could be turned into a creation that would surely feed the heart and fill the belly. Brunswick stew is a legendary Southern dish, a bowl that holds a little bit of everything, often with a dash of mystery. During the 70s, Brunswick stew had become the focal dish for family reunions, picnics, and even church bazaars. This thick, savory stew traditionally included whatever meat was handy: poultry, beef, ham, or even wild meats including rabbit or squirrel. Yes, squirrel! Add tomatoes, lima beans, corn, and potatoes into the mix, and you've got yourself a quick and filling stew perfect for a large group. It is, in fact, probably the epitome of a throw everything but the kitchen sink into the soup meal, and thick enough to stand a spoon in. There is some controversy about the origin of Brunswick stew, and both Brunswick, Georgia, and Brunswick County, Virginia, have laid claim to the dish. Some say it's the flavor that matters, others say it's the lore, but everyone agrees that no two pots are ever the same. Southerners did not shy away from letting it cook all day to get that depth of smokiness perfect. Southern cooks took pride in simmering it all day, getting that deep, smoky flavor just right. In the 70s, this was more than food. It was a community builder and a conversation starter. Brunswick stew was more of a concept rather than a recipe that could be followed diligently. The basis of this dish was in making something good out of what could be scrounged from the kitchen, the tradition beloved by the South. When it comes to Southern barbecue, pork ribs reign supreme. Without any doubt, ribs were a staple part of any cookout in the 70s, with smoky, tender, sticky meat in a pile. Each family had their own secret sauce, so some were sour, some spicy, and some were sweet enough to make your teeth ache. It took a lot of practice and time to master the ribs, which required just the right degree of charring and slow grilling. As the ribs cooked low and slow, neighbors would catch the smoky scent and sometimes invite themselves over. What could go better with those ribs? Coleslaw, of course. The crisp and refreshing coleslaw served with the ribs was usually made from shredded cabbage, carrot, and mayonnaise with a touch of vinegar. Some people put a pinch of sugar, others put lots of vinegar. Either way, it became the equivalent of a pleasant meal. Ribs and coleslaw were made to be messy, eaten with fingers, and piled high on paper plates. So, if you're one of those sophisticated folks who don't like to get their hands a little dirty, this one ain't for you. The best part? Finish off by licking your fingers. This was Southern grilling or barbecuing at its best. It was a tasty cookout that was finger-lickingly good and carried the barbecue aroma all over the neighborhood. Jambalaya is a Southern juice pot where rice, meat, seafood, and vegetables come together to create a spicy, rich, and delicious dish. In the 70s, especially in Louisiana, jambalaya was served for family gatherings and get-togethers. With roots in Spanish, French, and African cuisine, jambalaya perfectly captures the diversity and spirit of the South. This dish is a flavorful combination, with rice as the base, usually paired with chicken, andouille sausage, shrimp, or whatever is fresh. Tomatoes, onions, and bell peppers, known as the Holy Trinity of Cajun cooking, were essential for that authentic flavor. A touch of cayenne added the spice that made jambalaya famous, and every family had its own just right level of heat. And each family had its own right level of heat. At parties and tailgates in the 1970s, families gathered around large pots of jambalaya and sharing bowls of savory condiments that brought everyone together. Jambalaya isn't just a food. It's a celebration of a dish that brings people close with every savory spoonful. And if you've ever eaten it, you know that one bite is never enough. A Southern fish fry without catfish is like a beach without sand. In the 70s, catfish frying was a weekend tradition by family and friends, with family and friends gathering around to enjoy crispy, golden catfish straight out of the fryer. Southerners coat it with cornstarch and spices. Then it is fried until it is crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. But no catfish fry is complete without a hush puppy. These are fried corn balls that are crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. Legend has it that hush puppy got its name because cooks would throw them at hungry, barking dogs in order to hush the puppies while frying fish. The combination of a catfish and a hush puppy is an unbeatable pairing, perfect for eating out with tartar sauce or hot sauce. In the 70s, Southern families turned catfish frying into a little celebration, gathering together over a good meal and lots of laughter. This is the kind of food that fills the stomach and heart. It left everyone with a smile and a little cornmeal dust on their fingers. Known fondly as Southern pâté, pimento cheese is a humble yet beloved spread that made its way into many a lunchbox in the 1970s. This combination of grated cheddar, mayonnaise, and diced mento peppers with a bit of cheesy, creamy, and tangy flavor is the ultimate sandwich ingredient. Families in the South whip up batches of pimento cheese and use it on sandwiches, crackers, and even vegetables. It's cheap, cheerful, and full of flavor. It's a great way to keep meals simple but give a feeling of something fancy. In the 70s, pimento cheese sandwiches were everywhere, both at the lunch picnic, school lunch, and as a snack for hungry children and adults. While everyone has their own version, the classic version remains simple. It lets the sharpness of the cheese and the sweetness of the pimentos shine through. Pimento cheese is reportedly popular in the South because it doesn't require fancy ingredients or cooking. All it takes is a little bit of mixing and spreading, so if you grew up in the South, you've probably had a pimento sandwich or two. It's proof that a few simple ingredients can create something truly memorable, and of course, deliciously Southern. Country ham and red-eye gravy weren't just Southern food of the 70s, it was a personality. Southern kids grew up on this strong, smoky flavor. There's nothing bland about it. Country ham is different from regular ham because it is salted and dried for several months. Now that's dedication if I have ever seen one. It packs an extra punch that could wake you up faster than the gravy itself. And about that gravy? Red Eye is an unusual blend of black coffee and pan drippings poured over the ham for a sharp, savory kick that no kid could forget. Why coffee? Who knows, but it works. Some say gravy gets its name from the red eyes made from ham fat, but kids think it comes from the red eyes you get when you sneak in a bunch of bites when mom isn't looking. Pair with biscuits to absorb the rich sauce, then you've got the classic Southern breakfast that was somehow accepted as an anytime meal. No one knows how or why it works. They just know they like it. Country ham and red-eye gravy is a simple breakfast winner for Southern kids who want to start their day with bold flavors and mouthfuls of memories. Hoppin' John was the dish that Southern kids of the 70s didn't know they needed. It's a one-pot meal that combines black-eyed peas with rice, and usually ham hocks or smoked bacon. And no, not those black-eyed peas. It provides delicious flavor without much fuss. This name arouses curiosity. Who is John and why does he jump? Although no one knows the answer for sure, the story goes that Hoppin' John was a twist on traditional West African and Caribbean dishes. Therefore, each spoonful is filled with a long history. Children say it will bring good luck, especially when eaten on New Year's Day. But for many people, this means money and prosperity, or at least having a chance to get out of work. Black-eyed peas are believed to resemble small coins, so every bite is sort of an investment in your future. Or at least that's what your parents told you to make sure you ate the entire plate. When paired with cornbread or collard greens, Hoppin' John is flavorful, filling, and a fun way for kids to learn that sometimes the best food comes in simple packages. Fried green tomatoes were a rite of passage for Southern kids in the 70s, taught to them early on that you can't judge a tomato by its color. These tart, unripe tomatoes are firm and green, straight from the garden, sliced thin and coated with cornmeal, then fried until golden perfection. The result? A crunchy, tangy, and addictive snack that disappears faster than candy at Halloween. Fried green tomatoes teach children the art of patience and expectation as they stand by the stove waiting for the perfect crunch. And each family has their own way of getting their unique golden crust. There is some debate over whether cornstarch or flour is the best coating. However, the real debate is over dipping sauces. Some people swear by the ranch. Some people use spicy seasoning sauces. And some stubborn kids drown them in ketchup. Tomatoes and ketchup, really? I mean, to each their own, but come on. Fried green tomatoes are the star of the summer. They appear on dinner and picnic tables everywhere, proving that Southern cooking can turn even the simplest of ingredients into something special. If you grew up in the South, fried green tomatoes are not just food. They're a summer tradition, a snack for all ages. Okra and tomato stew are Southern staples that teach kids to love, or at least tolerate, okra. In the 70s, okra was a polarizing vegetable. They are known for being slippery when cut, but this stew was the way parents convinced kids to give it a chance. Simmered slowly with tomatoes, onions, garlic, and maybe a little bacon, okra became soft and almost sweet, and the sliminess worked well to thicken the sauce. Served over rice to thicken the stew or alongside chicken bread, this dish is surprisingly delicious and filling despite its humble ingredients. In the South, you could smell the stew simmering on the stove all summer long, since this is when okra and fresh tomatoes are in season. Even though the kids first gasped and groaned when they saw the okra, the flavorful mix won them over. It has just enough kick and spice to keep things interesting, and if you add some hot sauce, you'd get bonus points from adults. Okra and tomato stew is a simple dish of the South that teaches children that sometimes it's the simplest foods that suit the palate the most, and it dared everyone to try something new. If you could picture the renowned Southern comfort food of the 1970s, then the buttermilk biscuits come right on with white-winged grandmas who could knead dough with their eyes shut. These flaky wonders were not common mouth-watering recipes. They were assets. You know that you've made it when your biscuits are rising to the level where they could be called cloudy, but had the heft to hold a scoop of sausage gravy. The secret ingredient? Buttermilk, a special drink that possessed a unique sour taste that transformed mere dough into something edible. They moonlighted as vehicles for ham, butter, jelly, or any other leftovers your mom could slather between their pillowy halves. And here's a fun fact. Yes, Southern kids understood that there is such a thing as the biscuit hierarchy system. The fluffy center, prime real estate, the crusty edges. Still tasty, but it means you were late to the kitchen. So, if you were a child of the South in the 1970s, odds are you've got at least one story involving biscuits and a fierce family debate over who got the last one. In the South in the 70s, sweet potato casserole wasn't just a side dish. It was basically candy in disguise. This lively, creamy dough made from sweet potatoes, brown sugar, and butter creates a menu that is sweet and appetizing. But is that really the highlight? No. The real stars of the show are toppings. Some families opt for crunchy pecan streusel, while some families prefer to eat golden brown toasted marshmallows. This marshmallow layer often leads to heated debates. Some argue that it makes the casserole too sweet, while some people swear it's the only way to eat it. For kids, sweet potato casserole is pure magic, a sweet vegetable that can sneak dessert onto a dinner plate. In the 70s, it wasn't just reserved for Thanksgiving. It made appearances at Sunday dinners and potlucks, ensuring sweet potatoes had their moment year-round. Kids knew this was no ordinary casserole. Southerners of the 70s knew that sweet potato casserole was more than just a meal. It was also a cherished family recipe, a classic dish that's easy to eat, plus it tastes like a warm hug to those who grew up with it. And with just one bite, it will take you back to your childhood when sweet, buttery flavors were as much a tradition as anything. Pecan pie was the crown jewel of Southern desserts in the 70s, a chewy, sweet dessert that was often the star of the show. This pie is made with the perfect combination of butter, sugar, eggs, and crunchy pecans. The pie is rich, gooey, and perfectly Southern. Some recipes add vanilla or even a little bourbon to add depth. However, this adult version is often unsuitable for children, or so they say. The pie filling is thick and custardy. It has crunchy pecans. Every family in the South has its own style. Some people swear by corn syrup for its tough and watery texture. Some people prefer a more intensely flavored pecan pie. Pecan pie was a must at every holiday or special gathering, and kids looked forward to it almost as much as they did Christmas morning. Even after eating a big meal, there is always room for a slice. By the late 70s, Southern kids knew pecan pie wasn't just dessert. It was an event, a dish that turned any gathering into a celebration, for those who were lucky enough to grow up with it. Pecan pie isn't just food, it's a taste of tradition, pure comfort, and Southern hospitality wrapped in a buttery crust. In the 70s South, banana pudding wasn't just a dessert, it was the language of love. A layered masterpiece of vanilla pudding, sliced bananas, and Nilla wafers, the emphasis is on texture as much as flavor. Southern kids watched in awe as their mothers or grandmothers assembled it in glass bowls. Each layer has been carefully crafted for maximum flavor and visual appeal. Nilla wafers absorb the creamy pudding and soften it. This creates a cake-like texture that children absolutely adore, unable to resist. Banana pudding with whipped cream or meringue is equally delicious. And it's not just special occasion food. Every church, social, and family gathering has banana pudding. The kids love the sweetness of it. At the same time, adults admire its melancholy charm. By the late 1970s, Southern kids knew banana pudding was more than just a dessert, but it is also the main food of the family. It's an appetizer, and it is food that is connected from generation to generation. For those who grew up in the South, bananas are not just food, it's a sweet and creamy tradition. It is an irresistible symbol, and it's the perfect reminder that the best desserts are often the simplest. Let me be clear, German chocolate cake, despite its name, isn't German. Nope, it's as American as arguing with your sibling over who gets the last slice. Named after Samuel German, who developed a type of sweet baking chocolate, this cake was a showstopper at 1970s gatherings. It came loaded with a gooey coconut pecan filling that sent Southern kids into a frenzy. The real deal is the icing. It's a caramel-like concoction consisting of eggs, sugar, butter, and condensed milk, all thrown and whisked together. And don't forget the sprinkles of pecans that make this dessert feel like a hug. From the inside to the outside, Southern moms picked it up and proudly presented it at church gatherings as if revealing a masterpiece. You can bet your trapper keeper that there won't be a single scrap left in the afternoon. Fun fact, if you're lucky, you might find someone licking ice from a goose and proclaiming, "I came here for the frost," and no one will judge them for that. Butter beans and bacon are a Southern staple that even the pickiest kids of the 70s can keep up with. These creamy, richly flavored beans, starchy like lima beans, are flavored with smoked bacon. This gives the dish a flavor that is almost impossible to resist. When eaten with rice, bacon also adds an irresistible element of fun for kids, turning ordinary beans into something special. Every Southern family has a different flavor. Sometimes onions are added, a little vinegar or a little sugar to enhance the taste, and some houses even add a little hot sauce for a little spice. To Southern kids in the late 70s, butter beans and bacon were as familiar as bread. They weren't just another vegetable. They were Southern soul food, a dish that brought families together and introduced kids to the idea that vegetables could actually taste good. Butter beans isn't just a side dish, but it is a classic comfort dish of the South, and the perfect reminder that sometimes simple is best. In the South of the 1970s, peach cobbler was more than just a dessert. It was a ritual for anyone who dares use a cast-iron skillet. If you grew up in Georgia, the peach state, it was a birthright to have at least one friend who made cobbler that could make even the adults cry. This isn't your store-bought canned garbage. No, these peaches are so fresh you'll almost sing a country song when you slice them. Peach cobbler is the king of Southern desserts, sprinkled with flour or biscuit dough and baked to a syrupy golden color. The gooey, caramelized edges were the chef's reward, a secret that only true cobbler aficionados knew. And the sound of a spoon scraping the bottom of a plate? That's pure victory. Served warm and topped with a melting scoop of vanilla ice cream, it was summer in a bowl. Fun fact, TikTok didn't exist for kids back then, so they had to entertain themselves by fighting for the most delicious and sweet corner of the fruit pie. It was a competition with higher stakes than any recess game. Squash casserole is the Southern answer to a vegan party that the kids will actually eat and might enjoy. This creamy cheese dish is made with layers of mastic squash, onions, and melted cheese, topped with butter crackers or crispy breadcrumbs for the perfect crunch. Southern moms find squash casserole life-saving and enticing to even the pickiest eaters to try a few bites. It was the go-to for family gatherings, holiday dinners, and church potlucks, where it was nearly guaranteed to disappear before the meal was over. Southern kids learned that squash casserole was a friendly introduction to vegetables. Nothing too spicy, too green, or too strange. In fact, the squash melts into the creamy filling, which makes the texture soft and tastes like an appetizer. By the late 70s, Southern kids had squash casserole as a regular part of their diet, and many of them didn't even realize they were eating vegetables. It wasn't just a dish, it was a lesson in the Southern art of turning humble ingredients into something special. For those who grew up with it, squash casserole was like a warm, cheesy hug on the plate and a taste they never forgot. Chitlins or chitterlings were a Southern delicacy in the 70s, and kids were divided on whether they liked it or stayed away from it as much as possible. Chitlin is made from pork intestines, cleaned, boiled, and fried until almost crispy. Serve with vinegar or hot sauce. Southern families had chitlin dinners that doubled as an event, gathering around the pot and taking in the, distinct aroma. And the smell is something you will never forget. For those brave enough to try it, chitlin tastes similar to pork. It has a unique, chewy texture. Parents would encourage their kids with stories about how chitlins were a historic soul food staple, passed down through generations and celebrated for their roots in African American culture. In the late 70s, chitlins was still a special occasion dish, though not every Southern kid would agree. For those who grew up eating these foods, chitlins is more than just food. They were a lesson in culinary history, a taste of cultural tradition, and a reminder that Southern cooking often made the most out of every ingredient. Chitlins were a true Southern experience, unforgettable in every way. Imagine making baby pizza and quiche and raising them on a Southern farm. This, my friends, is the glory of this tomato cheddar and bacon pie, a classic 1970s dessert that has never been so good on a summer afternoon. This dish combines the Southern love of homegrown tomatoes with the universal truth that everything is better with bacon. Add sharp cheddar and a buttery, flaky crust, and you've got yourself a Southern slice of heaven. It is a type of pie that is technically served as a side dish, but it's so delicious that you secretly try it when no one's looking. If your mom brought this to lunch, you know she means business. And don't forget the pièce de résistance, a little mayonnaise or a little hot sauce, depending on your family's cooking preferences. Fun fact, Southern grandparents were able to nail down the perfect bacon-to-cheese ratio without even having a measuring cup. And everyone knows that when the pie comes out, you should get in line quickly. Otherwise, you risk getting nothing but breadcrumbs. Corn pudding is a custard gold side dish that made every Southern kid from the 70s smile. This isn't your usual chicken on the cob, but it is a mixture of chicken, eggs, milk, and a little sugar, baked to perfection until it was soft and fluffy in the center. The pudding had a flavor somewhere between cornbread and custard, with a melt-in-your-mouth texture that kept kids coming back for seconds. Corn pudding appears regularly at family dinners and holiday tables. This is one of those magical foods that makes vegetables feel like dessert. It has just the right amount of sweetness to keep kids excited. Southern families all have different tastes and their own recipes. Some add cheese, and some families add a little nutmeg or cinnamon for extra flavor. In the late 70s, corn pudding was a popular Southern classic, and kids knew they'd get something delicious every time it was served. For those who grew up with it, corn pudding was more than just food. It was a reminder of family gatherings, homemade comfort, and the sweet, simple joy that only Southern cooking could deliver. Vegetable pot pie was proof that you didn't need meat to make a satisfying meal. When times were tough and the meat was either too pricey or just plain unavailable, families turned to the next best thing: vegetables. Awful alternative for all of us who hate veggies, but you had to do what you had to do just to get by. The humble pot pie, traditionally packed with chicken or beef, took a vegetable-only turn during the Great Depression. It consisted of hearty vegetables like potatoes, carrots, peas, and some onions. Vegetable pot pie was a filling, flavorful dish that still gave you that comforting feeling of a homemade meal. And nobody here can even imagine what that must have felt like. When all you ate were just scraps of whatever you could find, getting a vegetable pot pie must have felt like getting a roasted steak. Plus, it was a great way to use up whatever was in the garden or on sale at the market. No meat? No problem. Those veggies could stand their ground. Cooking a vegetable pot pie wasn't only about stretching the budget, it was also about creativity. You could throw in whatever comes to mind and call it dinner. If you, by some miraculous chance, got any canned tuna, that would go in there also. And let's be honest, upon cracking open that golden crust, it didn't matter what lay inside. It only mattered that you had food on the table. Beef bourguignon is a cornerstone from Burgundy, involving marinated and slow-cooked beef chunks, typically tougher cuts like chuck, bathed in red wine, usually Burgundy, to tenderize the meat over several hours. This hearty stew is fortified with onions, garlic, and carrots, and enhanced with sautéed mushrooms and crisp lardons. Historically, this method likely evolved as a means to tenderize and enrich less desirable cuts of meat. The stew develops a rich, deep umami flavor from the Maillard reaction, which occurs as the beef browns, and the complex flavors intensify as the wine slowly melds with the herbs and vegetables. The slow cooking process not only enriches the stew's flavor, but also fills the kitchen with an inviting aromatic warmth, making beef bourguignon synonymous with comforting, rich French culinary tradition. Rice pudding. A sweet reminder that nothing should go to waste, especially not leftover rice. In the era of the Great Depression, where every rice grain was counted, families found a way to turn yesterday's leftover dinner into today's sweet dessert. Rice pudding became the ultimate budget-friendly treat, transforming something simple into something comforting and sweet with just a little sugar, milk, and a dash of cinnamon if you were feeling particularly fancy. I know leftover rice seems kind of blah, but once it simmers into something that looks and smells like pudding, you'll forget what you were even talking about. Plus, it was an easy way to turn ingredients you had into something new, which saved you money and a trip to the store. It felt like a real treat even in lean times, and that's why it was so popular among families. A warm bowl of rice pudding could brighten up the end of any meal, turning frugality into a moment of indulgence. So even though it started as a way to cut food waste, it stayed a family favorite that warmed up even the coldest hearts in those freezing times. Staying on the theme of no waste or zero waste, whatever you prefer to call it, coq au vin stands out as a rich, soul-warming dish that is achieved through a slow cooking process that melds the flavors of chicken and wine thoroughly. Traditionally used to soften tough roosters, modern recipes often utilize chicken, marinated, and then braised in wine, typically red, along with mushrooms, onions, garlic, and a bouquet garni. Initially, the chicken is seared until golden, then simmered slowly with lardons, which infuse a smoky depth. This technique showcases French braising skills, starting with a high sear followed by a gentle, prolonged cooking in a covered pot, allowing the intricate flavors to blend and enhance the meat. The selection of wine is pivotal, forming a flavorful sauce base that deeply seasons the chicken, transforming it into a hearty, deeply satisfying stew that exemplifies rustic yet refined French cooking. Corned beef and potato hash was a true Depression-era hero. It was affordable and filling. In a time when fresh meat was hard to come by, corned beef in a can was a lifesaver. Corned beef and potato hash was a shelf-stable, cheap, and stretchy meal. It was a dish that kept bellies full without keeping the wallets empty. The beauty of corned beef hash was in its simplicity. Fry up some chopped potatoes, toss in that canned corned beef, and let it all get crispy in the pan. Adding an onion or two added a bit of spice, but not everyone had that option available. But even if you couldn't afford onions, the combination of corned beef and potatoes was just enough. It was a meal that tasted like you put way more work in than you actually did. It was the kind of meal that could stretch to feed the whole family and still leave enough for leftovers the next day. Corned beef and potato hash wasn't just a Depression-era staple. It was proof that you didn't need fresh ingredients or fancy cooking techniques to make a hearty, filling, and tasty dish on a budget. When times were tough, nothing went to waste, especially not bread. Instead of tossing out stale loaves, crown roast of lamb is an exquisite dish often reserved for special occasions and holiday feasts. This majestic preparation involves arranging racks of lamb into a circular shape that resembles a crown, with ribs pointing skyward. It's seasoned with a mix of rosemary, garlic, and thyme, both in the marinade and as a rub applied before roasting. To enhance its flavor and retain moisture, the crown center is typically filled with a stuffing composed of breadcrumbs, minced garlic, herbs, and occasionally dried fruits like apricots or cranberries. The lamb is roasted until it achieves a tender texture and a beautifully browned exterior. Precision in tying the racks together ensures the roast cooks evenly. To perfect its presentation, chefs often cover the tips of the ribs with foil during roasting to prevent charring. This dish not only dazzles as a culinary delight, but also stands as a festive centerpiece, symbolizing celebration and feasting. While on the topic of soup, let's not forget to mention onion soup. And since it is fall and fall is the soup-making season, maybe you'll get an idea or two on what to make for your next dinner. The onion soup was proof that even the humblest ingredients could make a delicious meal. In case you didn't know, when you're working on a tight budget, onions become your best mates. They were widely available and quite cheap at the time, so they were the go-to vegetable in hard times. When you mix a few onions and some broth, even if it's just water and a bouillon cube, you'll get yourself a soup that's rich in flavor but light on your wallet. The thing that makes onion soup such a classic and timeless meal is its simplicity. Though caramelizing onions takes a bit of time and patience, they add a depth of flavor that makes you forget you're eating something as simple as soup. Once they hit that sweet golden spot, there's no coming back. With just a few ingredients, you can create something that feels gourmet, even when times are lean. But we can't forget the bread and cheese. No onion soup is complete without them. Traditionally, a slice of bread and a sprinkle of cheese are broiled on top. But even without this fancy finish, onion soup remains a delicacy of this time. What fascinates me about onion soup is that it manages to make an ingredient such as an onion the star of the show, making it into a bowl of comfort that feels like a splurge, even though it is not. Sole meunière is an exemplary dish that highlights the inherent flavors of its primary ingredient through a simple yet precise preparation method. This dish involves a sole fillet, lightly dusted with flour, then pan-fried in butter to a perfect golden brown. After cooking, the fillet is enhanced with a sauce of the pan's browned butter, fresh lemon juice, and chopped parsley, drizzled over the fish to amplify its delicate, sweet taste. The freshness and quality of the sole are crucial. Ideally, the fish is prepared soon after being caught, underscoring the importance of ingredient freshness in French culinary arts. The preparation focuses on preserving the fish's natural flavors, complemented subtly by the nutty browned butter and the bright lemon juice. Choosing sole, a flatfish valued for its fine texture and mild flavor, is vital as it cooks quickly and uniformly, making sole meunière a revered dish for its elegant simplicity. Beans and rice, a dynamic duo that has been filling up bellies for generations. In lean times, this combination was a nutritional powerhouse with protein, carbs, and plenty of flavor, all without costing much. When money was tight, beans and rice were the way to go. They were cheap, filling, and could stretch to feed a whole family with just a few basic ingredients. Another great thing about this meal is its versatility. Got any spices lying around? Throw them in. A sad, lonely veggie waiting to be declared garbage? Throw it in too. It is the meal that will adapt to whatever you had in the house, not the other way around. It always manages to come out tasting like you put more effort into it than you did. Plus, let's be real. When you've got a pot of beans simmering away and some rice cooking on the side, it smells like home, which is what people at the time desperately needed to be reminded of. The beauty of bean and rice is that it is not just a survival meal, it is a comfort food packed with nutrition. While we're on the topic of rice, my personal favorite. Cornish game hen, a petite and elegant poultry choice, typically weighs no more than 2 pounds and is ideal for serving as an individual portion, making it perfect for an upscale dinner. These hens are usually roasted whole, seasoned lightly with herbs like thyme and sage, and basted in butter to achieve a crispy golden skin while keeping the meat juicy and tender. The cavity may be stuffed with a flavorful blend of breadcrumbs, chopped vegetables, and herbs, enriching the meat during cooking. The cooking process often involves high-temperature roasting to crisp the skin, followed by a resting period before serving to ensure the meat remains moist. Serving Cornish game hens on a bed of wild rice or alongside roasted vegetables allows their delicate flavors to shine, making them a favored choice for intimate dining and special occasions due to their ideal portion size and visually appealing presentation. This simple, affordable dish made its way onto many kitchen tables. Creamed peas on toast. Yuck! Sounds terrible to me, but maybe some of you will disagree. In hard times, this was the go-to meal for families looking for something hearty without draining the pantry. Canned peas, some butter, flour, and milk, and you had yourself a creamy sauce that could turn a humble slice of toast into a meal. I know it doesn't sound glamorous, but creamed peas on toast were the purest form of comfort. You didn't need fancy ingredients or hours of prep time. Toss the peas in a quick white sauce, pour it over toast, and voila, dinner is served. It was filling and warm, with just the right amount of creamines to make you forget that it was actually a can of peas and a piece of toast. Creamed peas on toast came with a great bonus. It was quick to prepare, making it ideal for those nights when you were hungry but didn't have much to work with. It won't win you any culinary awards, but creamed peas on toast was a no-fuss comfort food that got the job done. Chimichangas are a deep-fried burrito with lots of peppers to add a pretty heavy kick depending on the sauce. Available easily in most states nowadays, chimichanga actually had their roots in Arizona. Macayo's Mexican Kitchen claims they put chimichangas on their menus first in the 1970s. Since then, the dish has ruled over Arizona as a good dinner food that can be served and enjoyed. Beef Wellington, named perhaps after the Duke of Wellington, is a marvel of British cuisine that showcases culinary artistry. Imagine beef tenderloin lovingly coated with pâté and duxelles, all wrapped in a crisp puff pastry. The precision in sealing the tenderloin tightly within the pastry, ensuring it cooks to juicy perfection while keeping the pastry flaky, is what makes or breaks this dish. Served primarily at grand dinners and special occasions, it often came accompanied by rich gravies and elegant veggies. The phrase, "a feast fit for royalty," wasn't thrown around lightly, as it perfectly captured the essence of this dish. Dining on beef Wellington typically featured a moment where it was sliced right at the table, displaying the succulent meat and intricate layers, a true feast for the senses. Its grand presentation made it a memorable part of any celebratory meal. Salmon bakes in Alaska go much further back than you would imagine. Introduced in the 1800s, commercial restaurants only started to serve salmon bakes during the 1970s. Chinook salmon was one of the most widely caught fish in Alaska, and so locals created multiple dishes using it. We've got ourselves split pea soup with ham. When money was tight and meat was a luxury, even the humble ham bone found new life as the star of this hearty dish. Toss it into a pot of split peas, and you've got yourself a soup that could feed the whole family for days. The magic of the soup wasn't in the peas, but in the leftover ham bone, which gave the soup that smoky, rich flavor you could ask for without actually needing any meat. That right there is kitchen creativity at its finest, bringing out every bit of goodness out of something that might have otherwise been thrown away. As the peas simmer and break down, the ham bone starts working its magic and releases all the flavors into the broth. If you were one of the lucky ones, you would catch a few small bits of meat still clinging to it. But never mind if you didn't, the bone still did its job. Duck à l'orange marries the deep, rich flavors of duck with the sharp zestiness of oranges, a culinary duo dating back to the Renaissance, though it gained popularity in Paris in the early 20th century. This classic dish features roasted duck with a skin crisped to perfection, paired with a sweet and tangy orange sauce made from fresh orange juice, sugar, vinegar, and sometimes Grand Marnier. To perfect duck à l'orange, meticulous attention is paid to rendering the fat from the duck skin, ensuring it crisps up beautifully to contrast with the juicy meat beneath. The sauce is usually prepared separately and reduced to a luscious syrup, then drizzled over the duck just before serving to preserve its bold, vibrant flavors. This dish masterfully balances the rich, natural fat of the duck with the bright, acidic notes of citrus, showcasing refined culinary techniques. Families turned them into dumplings to stretch meals further, and tomato soup became the perfect partner for this duo. You'd take some day-old bread, mix it with a little milk and maybe an egg if you had one, and form it into dumplings. Then, plop those into a pot of your regular tomato soup, and you've just transformed a basic dish into something served at restaurants. The bread dumplings would soak up that rich tomato flavor, making every bite feel more flavorful. It was a genius way to avoid food waste and make the most out of what was on hand. Not to mention that tomato soup was already a favorite since it was cheap and easy to make from canned tomatoes. The bread dumplings were just a cherry on top, or dare I say, the dumpling in soup. Together, they created a hearty, satisfying meal that filled you up without costing too much. And that is a win-win in my book. Named in honor of the Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, chicken tetrazzini was reportedly whipped up by chef Ernest Arbogast at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco around the early 1900s. This dish, a testament to American culinary creativity, combines diced chicken and mushrooms with linguine or spaghetti in a sumptuous, creamy sauce that's often elevated with a splash of wine or sherry. Once assembled, it's liberally topped with grated Parmesan and baked until a golden crust forms on top. The addition of sherry or wine doesn't only boost the flavor, it also cuts through the cream's richness with its acidity. Typically, this dish is finished with a sprinkle of parsley or paprika to boost its visual appeal and add layers of subtle flavor. Despite its straightforward ingredients, chicken tetrazzini welcomes variations, such as almonds or pimentos, enhancing both its taste and texture. It's not just a delicious meal, but also a smart way to repurpose leftover chicken or turkey. Homemade meatloaf, the best-kept secret for stretching a small amount of meat into a full meal. In hard times, buying enough ground beef for the whole family was a challenge, to say the least. But meatloaf came to the rescue. That makes it sound like a superhero. But in a way, it was. The trick was to add breadcrumbs, oats, or whatever filler you had in the house, mix it all up, and you've got yourself a meal that could feed many. Meatloaf was a sort of blank canvas for creative chefs. You could toss in onions, ketchup, or mustard, plus you could top it off with the famous ketchup glaze. The end result was a meal that felt satisfying, even though you'd sneakily cut the meat with cheaper ingredients. The beauty of meatloaf was that no two recipes were ever the same. Each household had its own version, depending on what they had in the pantry. And let's not forget the most important part, the leftovers. They were good the next day too. Some would say even better. You could slice it up for sandwiches or reheat it for another dinner. It was a comfort food at its finest. Cheap, simple, budget-friendly, and packed with flavor, so you forgot what it actually was. Tracing back to soups for a second, lobster Newburg, the epitome of seafood luxury, was whipped up by Ben Wenberg and became a sensation at Delmonico's restaurant in New York in the late 1870s. This dish is a creamy affair with lobster chunks sautéed in butter, then delicately married with a rich blend of egg yolks, cream, and a splash of sherry. The sherry's slight sharpness cuts through the cream, creating a signature flavor that's both rich and refined. Lobster Newburg is all about opulence, often served with a sprinkle of cayenne in a golden puff pastry shell, or alongside buttered toast. Picture the elegance of this dish being prepared right at your table, adding a dash of culinary theater to the dining experience. It was the toast of the town in upscale eateries, where its lavishness matched the plush dining trends of that era. I forgot my favorite one, potato soup, a true staple for when you're on a budget and trying to feed the crowd. With just a few spuds, I can never say that word and not think of Ross dressed as Spudnik in that Halloween episode of Friends. Never mind, allow me to continue. As I was saying, with just a few spuds, some water or broth, and a little milk or cream, you can whip up a pot of creamy soup that will make you feel like you're eating something fancy. Potato soup is as simple as it gets, but that's why everyone loves it. Plus, if you throw in a few onions and carrots, my dears, you've got yourself a true delicacy. Ooh, and don't forget the toppings. Cheese, bacon bits, and green onions can really jazz this dish up. And as all of you probably know, potato soup tastes even better the next day, once all the ingredients get a chance to, as I like to say, get to know each other better. I don't know about you, but this soup is my favorite even today, when it's not made to stretch the family's food budget, but rather to bring some nostalgic feelings around the house. While we're on the topic of potatoes, fried catfish was a no-brainer for Arkansas because the state is quite literally flooded with catfish. Readily available fish and locals who love fried food led to the creation of fried catfish. A rather interesting way to cook catfish, fried catfish reached the peak of its popularity in the 70s, becoming common at most family dinner tables. Let's talk about mac and cheese casserole. It was one of the ultimate Depression-era comfort foods that has stuck around, and for a good reason. When boxed macaroni and cheese hit the scene, it was an instant hit. It was cheap, easy, and offered that specific taste that made everyone forget in how much trouble they were. Well, at least forget it while at a dinner table. In the Great Depression era, people tried to stretch every dollar, and mac and cheese casserole made that possible. With a little milk and some butter, if you had it, you could make a meal that would make everyone at the table smile from joy, while still remaining on the budget. But the magic started when you turned that everyday mac into a casserole. Toss it in a dish with some breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs and bake until it's golden and crispy. And the same thing goes for this casserole as it did for scalloped potatoes. Get creative with it. If you have Sam ham or bacon, don't be afraid to use it. Make the best out of those leftover peppers. Turn that basic box of pasta into something indulgent. Moving away from the cheesy, creamy dishes, talking about fried food, chicken cacciatore in California is chicken fried in olive oil and then simmered in a sauce of white wine, tomatoes, and herbs. Italian-American restaurants in the state absolutely love having this as either a main course accompanied with garlic bread. The balanced meal of bread, chicken, and tomato soup made for a perfect dinner spread. Scalloped spuds, or rather, scallop potatoes. A dish that takes simple potatoes and makes them into rich, creamy, and cheesy masterpieces. I can put my hand in a fire and say that even the pickiest eaters would turn their heads for this dish. When money was a constant issue, scalloped potatoes became a go-to comfort meal for families looking to make something to impress their guests with. But without spending a fortune, of course. Honestly, who could resist a thinly sliced potato, smothered in a rich and creamy sauce? All you needed in order to make this delicacy was some milk, a little butter, and a sprinkle of cheese. And of course, spuds. Now, what you want to do is layer those thinly sliced potatoes in a baking dish and cover them with sauce. Bake until they turn to that perfect golden color. Here's the fun part. Oh, how amazing a dish is when you can alter it in any way you like. You could add onions, ham, or bacon, or even better, a bit of both. But whatever you choose, you won't be disappointed. Scalloped potatoes will be your best friend in times of need. Now I'm in a mood for something cheesy. Chicken and dumplings originated outside of Alabama, but found a very loving home in the state where it was popularly served. Chinese Americans restaurants would serve the dish as an affordable dinner for people. In the 1970s, Alabama had dumpling joints that would specifically have chicken and dumplings as a bestseller. We are now in the turnip and carrot hash territory. Now please listen to this. I know how it sounds, but give it a chance. I mean, our ancestors did eat this at some point in time. It's not inedible. When potatoes were too precious to waste, turnips were the ones who took over their spotlight. During hard times, turnips, these beasts of root vegetables, were everyone's go-to for stretching meals. As for the preparation, there's not much to say. Just chop turnips and carrots, throw them in a pot with some oil, and let them sizzle until they're golden brown. As they cook, their earthy flavors will come together and create the perfect hash. I love a good hash, honestly. This one in particular didn't really catch my eye, but hey, who am I to judge? Maybe it's a once-in-a-lifetime dining experience. Who knows? I think it would taste much better with some meat in it, and our ancestors agreed with that statement. Plus, it's the kind of dish that could easily be turned into a breakfast if you cracked one egg and fired it. So, whether you were craving breakfast, lunch, or dinner, turnip and carrot hash could fill your every desire. While we're on the subject of vegetables, funeral potatoes have a much more depressing name than what they actually are, which is just a cheesy casserole. These potatoes were served at family gatherings or friends having get-togethers. The cheesy potatoes would be the first dish to get finished up at any dinner gathering. Maple glazed ham might get you thinking, what's so special about Vermont's ham? The question is not about the ham, but the syrup. Sugar maple, you see, tends to adore sweet soil, which is in abundance in Vermont. So maple syrup from there is a league on its own. Pair that with cured ham, and you can figure out why this dish was an iconic choice for dinner at diners and restaurants. We must mention the classic ragout of vegetables. Ragout of vegetables is a French-inspired stew that is the culinary equivalent of throwing everything together and hoping for the best. Out of all the dishes mentioned, this one is probably the most versatile and surprising. You never truly know what leftovers you have lying around the house, so once you gather them all together in a stew, who knows what you'll make? A few carrots with slight discoloration, a half-rotten tomato, a potato you don't even remember buying. That is what you're working with. But once you chop them all up and throw them in a pot with some broth and herbs, you'll create a bubbly stew in no time. The great thing about ragout is that it is entirely customizable. No two batches will ever be the same, and it's a great way to practice cooking and feel like a gourmet chef. Hey, Gordon Ramsay wasn't born a professional. So next time your vegetable drawer fills up with old veggies, don't just toss them out, but rather make yourself some old-fashioned ragout. Rhode Island has always loved its seafood, and stuffed quahogs were a popular dinner in the 70s. Quahog clams that would be filled with bread, chorizo, and then more clams. Rhode Islanders affectionately refer to them as chowder clams. The dish itself was a little on the pricier side, so it was not the most popular dinner, but it was definitely sought after. Frogmore stew in South Carolina was the ultimate one-pot dinner. Preparation-wise, all you had to do was throw shrimps, red potatoes, and sausages into one pot with lots of seasoning and vegetables. Boiling these items together and serving Frogmore stew on dinner tables was like serving the best dish in town. As for the taste? Well, it is a given that this mess of seafood and sausages tasted incredible. Boiled dinner featuring corned beef and cabbage was the ultimate meat stretch of its time. People had to find ways to make a little go a long way, and nothing could to it as good as a boiled dinner. Just imagine that you've got a hunk of corned beef, some cabbage that's, let's be honest, seen better days, and a few potatoes hanging out in the pantry, and voila, dinner is served. Throw everything in one pot, add water, and let it simmer until the meat is tender and the vegetables soften. It is a meal that practically cooks itself, while you sit back and enjoy some quality time with your family. or while you chase your kids around the house. But the leftovers are the real prize. You can turn them into sandwiches and hash, and you can even use the leftover broth for a new soup. This boiled dinner is the perfect reminder that with just a bit of creativity, you can whip up a delicious meal even when money is tight. Salmon was also welcomed with open arms, as cedar-planked salmon was a local delicacy in Oregon. Locals from Oregon submerged cedar planks for around 2 to 3 hours in water and then cooked salmon on it, giving the dish an intense flavor. That, paired with lemon juice and garlic, would captivate the taste buds of Oregon throughout the 70s. Fried cornbread, or as some like to call it, hoe cakes, was a Southern staple during the Great Depression that made every meal a bit more enjoyable. When you didn't have much, cornbread was the thing that came to the rescue. It was simple, affordable, and made with ingredients most people had on hand: cornmeal, water, maybe a bit of buttermilk if you were one of God's favorites. Plus, if you throw it in a hot skillet with some oil, you could turn those ingredients into some crispy, golden, and irresistible bites. Fried cornbread was often served with soups or beans, two other Depression-era staples, as you've learned by now. Together, they made a hearty, filling meal that could stretch for days. And I don't know about you, but that crispy cornbread edge is something that always makes my mouth water. Dip it into a bowl of soup or pile on some beans, and suddenly a modest meal feels a little more special. And let's be real, anything fried instantly ups the comforting factor. I mean, just take a look at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Would they be as popular if they were Kentucky Boiled Chicken? I don't think so. I hope you enjoyed this trip down south, and if you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us which Southern dishes make your tummy go yee-haw.